Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of DCT Recruitment's podcast. And today we're joined by the wonderful Jane Morris. Thanks for joining us today, Jane.
Hi, Graham. Thanks for inviting me. Hi, Diane.
You're most welcome.
So let's start with getting to know Jane a little bit better. Jane, tell us a little bit about your history, your journey in terms of the business world.
Well, I've been a HR professional for all of my career, actually, and really enjoyed working in lots of big organisations across the UK and also globally. And really enjoyed working with different teams, different cultures in different countries. And I finished my career in corporate life as a HR director. And I was working across Europe, helping the European teams with their leadership coaching, but for board of directors, and also mentoring the HR directors in those countries as well, with regard to change management. So we were always doing a lot of change, as big corporates do. And I was helping them sort of lead the change, really, and make sure that people followed them. And then I started working for myself about 4 years ago, just before COVID. Yay! Great time to start your business. And went into the world of Zoom and new employment law, obviously lots of COVID regulations and all these things all the things that I'd known for all my career suddenly just weren't important anymore. It was all about your furlough and your COVID. So we hit that storm, all of us together. Which, some people survived well, and unfortunately, it was a tough time for some businesses. So helping businesses that were managing through that change was actually really interesting for me. Then we all settled back down. We came back to work. We came back into the office, and now we're back to the normal sort of employment law situations and the normal leadership challenges. Although the COVID effect is that a lot of people are loving this flexible working. So the fact that we're actually doing this podcast today, it's been accelerated by the fact that we're all used to being online now as well. And it's one of those conversations, isn't it, Diane, that you have, which is, do you prefer to do things online, or do you prefer going back to face, which is one of those.
To be honest, I think nearly every podcast, no matter what the category is being, Graham, I think that's being brought up, as it, about hybrid working and the pros and cons and whether it's good, whether it's bad. And I think you could have a whole day talking about that with all different aspects, and I think that just has to be for individual business needs, doesn't it? And has to be put across for individual people in their business, know what's right and what's wrong, but flexibility is definitely key to have within any business, I think, with not just hybrid working, but the new generations of people, that are coming through. How we manage different generations of people now is completely different to, probably when you were younger, like I was, Jane, we got told to do something, you just did it, you didn't argue back, did you? You just did what you were told. And now people are a lot more informed because of the internet, and they understand the rights, and rightly so, that's good. However, it can create, as you probably well know, many challenges in the workplace at times, with different generations not working in synergy together at times.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we say it together.
We all agree.
Yeah, we're all in it together. I think the younger generation, coming through, they've been to university, they've managed their time, a lot of them, and their expectations are different. We need to accommodate that, but also we have got a business to run. And sometimes people say about, HR, nobody likes HR. The managers don't like us because we stop them from doing things. The employees don't like us because we're always going to tell them off or something like that. And I'd like to think that actually I bring a little bit of a different spin to the HR world. Firstly, because from an employer's point of view, then I like to work with the employers as a business manager. So, what do we want to do that's good for the business, but also what do we want to do, that works for the employee as well? So it's not about the employee rights or the employer can't do this or can do that. I had a client who asked me last week if they could introduce a policy that said people weren't allowed to talk about their salaries, right? And, they said, are we allowed to do that under data protection? And I was like, well, if you're going to introduce a policy, you've got to be able to enforce it. You can't stop people. If people want to talk about how much they earn, they're going to do it. So let's just wind it back a bit. And why is it that you want people to stop talking about their salaries? And actually, well, it's causing a bit of disruption. Is it? Why? Are you not being
paying some people
because
enough?
It's not consistent.
Yeah,
So get to the root cause of the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no point in putting a policy in, whether it's data protection or whatever. Don't put a policy in saying don't talk about your salaries, because A, if people break it, you'll have to do something about it, and B, how are you going to enforce it? Instead, go back to maybe you need to change your remuneration policy and the transparency about paying for performance or paying for experience or whatever it is. I mean, Diane, in the recruitment world, people with experience or with qualifications usually demand a higher salary. People that have been in a business for longer might get more, but they might not, because you might have to pay more for the new recruit. So it's better for the workforce to understand those things than to, and then people feel like they're being treated like adults. We're all in it together. And then the odd person who may feel like they should have a pay rise, well, let's have a chat about that. Let's see if you should, if it's affordable, maybe next year or whatever it is. But let's not just put a blanket policy in and hope that, it stops the problem.
I think a way around that like the NHS do well is having a banding for different grades. I think that's one of the best things. And I know for us at McDonald's, we had different grades for performance review. So you had different percentages for your pay rise. If you put all that clear, then, you've got an argument as to say why somebody's been there, someone's been there longer, or they've got a grade 4 PR and got the highest pay rise for the last 3 years, then they're going to be on more than you if you haven't performed to that level. So, I totally agree there. You're just putting a policy in for policy's sake. And if you make the employees feel capped on what they can discuss, that creates conflict anyway, doesn't it?
I'm not sure that it's a policy for policy's sake. I think it's a policy for political sake within an organisation. There's politically some information that they want to hide from certain people because they've made certain business decisions which actually aren't that transparent and aren't that fair, and they don't want that coming out because it will alter the status quo within the organisation. That's a massive cultural problem. And I was interested in, Jane, that you mentioned that you were involved in change management before, and I was going to ask you actually what made you, when you were setting up again, decide to go the HR route and not the change management sort of consultancy route, or do you kind of blend the two together?
Yeah, well, initially when I started, obviously, as I say, we were hitting COVID. So change management was happening anyway. And all those, strategy meetings and things that people normally have just gone. People just wanted advice about what do we have to pay people and kind of make people come to work and all that. So the demand really drove the initial needs and the initial sort of supply of services. But I also, work with larger businesses where I offer them personal leadership training and also organisational change training as well, where their teams are growing and they're promoting leaders. And I'm actually running an open leadership workshop on the 20th of February, which is in the Liverpool city centre in the women's organisation in St James Street in Baltic Wharf. And that's a full day session where we help first time leaders, business owners who've got their first sort of 6 staff, or, you know, middle managers that just need some support. And we talk about all of those things like delegation, performance coaching, the difference between coaching and mentoring. So when to coach, when to mentor, and also, you know, that horrible experience that you have when you actually get promoted for the first time and you go from the mate to the manager, and suddenly all your relationships have changed and you're in this job, you don't know what you're doing, whereas before, you know, you were like top of the shop, you know, the best in the team. And now suddenly you're the manager and you don't know what you're doing or who's your friend or where to go. That can be a lonely experience when you first get promoted. So we talk about that. Yeah. And then we talk about having those difficult conversations. So, you know, the person who's off sick, the person who unfortunately needs to be dismissed or is made redundant, or the person who's talking about their salary everywhere and upsetting everybody, you know. So that's all leadership. I mean, Diane knows this. It's all about leadership.
Yeah. Well, I saw Diane smirking in the middle of that because I know that you know.
It reminds me of me McDonald's when I was training all them courses, them days of, you know, how many times you'd be in stores and the managers had to jump up and like they had to then discipline the friends or send the friends off shift and stuff. And it just like, you know, but what it does do is set them up for life a little bit, you know, because they are young in McDonald's. You know, I was a manager at the age of 18. Which I think why I manage everything in my life, you know. So I've been a manager in my mind more than I've probably been just a normal human being, should we say. So, but it sets you up for life for that. And I know from people who've attended Jane's course, you've had like really 5-star reviews and stuff. And, you know, when I came into the business world of being out of a bubble of McDonald's for 22 years, you know, you realise that not many organisations do put training into the business, and you know, say for us from a recruitment point of view, people would think, oh, that's an expensive cost, I don't want to pay that, don't want to pay an expert to do that. However, you know, the retention to your staff is even more important. So if you were to choose, I would, regardless of what I do now, recruitment, but I still would probably put my money into training because retention of your staff is imperative, isn't it? You know, losing a member staff is probably on average £8,000 to £10,000 a year. You know, I know just a crew member back at McDonald's was like £3,500. A business manager, like when, you know, we would have left, it have been a good £25,000 to £30,000 loss to the business. So, you know, putting that training into place, you know, what is it, £295 plus VAT, Jane? I forgot that right.
Only £275, Diane.
Well, there you go. I've just added £20.
Far too cheap. Far too cheap. We're going to make sure that figure goes up before this goes out. This podcast goes out. So by the time you hear this, it's probably gone up. I mean, I was interested also, Jane, that you said it's kind of gone back to normal, but in a way, has it gone back to normal? Because the other elements are still there. The hybrid working is there. The remote working is there. That the more and more people are able to do a job, maybe in a split role. And actually, I think that will become more and more relevant as the next generation comes in as well, because I think that the one thing that Gen Z is choosing to do is perhaps not necessarily put all their eggs in one basket, but actually maybe I want to be this thing one day, and I might want to do a bit of charity work over there, and I might want a job doing this over here. So, you know, there will become more room maybe for sort of flexible roles as we go forward. But also, I think, you know, one of the things that COVID and that whole experience showed as well was with management, that once you start dissipating where people are and how you got to manage them both synchronously, asynchronously, etc., that actually a lot of people just do not have the skill set to do it, and companies don't necessarily have the tools to do it. So we've got a lot of accidental managers out there with companies that don't have the tools to do it, and that causes a problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And at the risk of sounding like a Conservative Prime Minister, we're in the new normal, right? New normal, right? And so we better get used to it, because we're not going back to how it used to be. You're right. This is it. And a lot of people now have, you know, second income streams, as you say. They'll do, you know, I know somebody who's an accountant by day and a social media guru by night, you know, because that a hobby that's come into something that he's now making some money with and enjoying. So yeah, we've got lots of, and remote working is also something that we cover on the leadership training. So how to manage people remotely. So that could be people in another country. It could be somebody who, you know, works from home 1 day a week. Or it could be, like I say, you know, the lads in the vans. So Diane recruits a lot of construction people, and they're out on the roads in the vans. And, you know, we often put in tools like trackers and iPads to find out where they are and sign off jobs and that sort of thing. But actually, although that's important, especially for health and safety, actually, how do you motivate those guys, you know, to be, you know, happy at work, motivated, performing every day, when you don't see them? Perhaps you only see them once a week when they bring the timesheets in or something like that. So, you know, that communication that you agree. And on the course, one of the things that I talk about is if you phone one of your team members and they're not there and you leave a message, how quickly do you expect them to call you back? And we always have this debate about, you know, well, it depends whether, you know, I've left an urgent message or what they're doing and da, da, da. So I say, that's right. All of those things are important. So you agree up front. Yeah. So I'm probably going to phone you every morning to see how you're doing. Yeah. If you're busy and you can't pick up, that's fine. But ring me back or send me a message within half an hour. If you don't do that, then I'll phone you again.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the employee's busy. You ring and then you ring again half an hour later and the employee's up a ladder somewhere, you know, and they're like, oh, stop ringing me, you know. So you have communication processes that are agreed, not just face to face, like we'll meet on Zoom on Friday afternoon, but actually this is when I ring you. If it's urgent, I'll send you a text as well. And then you know it's urgent.
Well, the other thing with communication processes, which, you know, communication is my bag, baby. Okay. So the other thing with that is as well, is we don't necessarily, we make a lot of assumptions about other people's communication processes and the way that people communicate as well. And what we do know now is we know an awful lot more about things like neurodiversity, for example. A lot of the time when we are building communication processes, we still do not take into consideration the differences between different people in terms of styles of communication. And that's a massive problem. And I don't know how many times you've seen this, Jane, but how many times have you seen someone from the top who likes a particular process put into place that process because that's the way they communicate, only to find that the rest of their organization doesn't communicate in that way?
Yeah.
Have you seen that, Diane?
Yeah, definitely, loads of times. Even today I had a conversation and I was like, somebody was asking for something and I was like, when do you need it? And he was like, ASAP. So I was like, well, ASAP to me is tomorrow. So is that how quick you want it, or in 1 or 2 weeks? Because people's different assumptions of ASAP are completely different, because you know, people working at a slower pace at times or whatever. So I'm quite like fast paced. So for me, that means he wants someone tomorrow, which is what we did. But, you know, it's a case of, so going back to that communication channel, you know, I know something I do with my team is make sure, you know, the targets and objectives is in the calendar, recurring at the same time, on the same day every week. So that they know it's a routine, isn't it? So going back to ringing someone in the morning, like when I was in COVID and we were all working at home, I would ring everyone at certain times, you know, so they become available, so they know to keep themselves available at that time, really. Because one thing I always used to say when I taught management is it either breaks down because of communication, so somebody's misunderstood, yeah, or not pass the message on, you know, so it's like a second tier message they haven't told them. So going back to you, Graham, is people assume that you just know, or it can be knowledge, can't it? Because just because someone's done a job for X amount of times doesn't necessarily mean they understand your communication or your jargon or whatever the way you say it. So it's asking for them to repeat back as well, isn't it? You know, what have I just asked you to do type of thing? Can you just clarify that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My biggest nightmare is booking meetings, as you know. And it's, you know, it's just little things like, you know, someone will send you or say, yeah, let's book that date in your diary, etc. And maybe they'll send you a Zoom link, or you'll say to them, can you send me a Zoom for that? And what they'll do is they'll send you the link for the Zoom, but not the diary entry for the Zoom. And then that doesn't go in your diary. So you've got that hanging around in your email, but you haven't got the date booked out in the thing. So unless you're the kind of person that automatically thinks, well, I'm going to go to my diary now and book that out, etc., then what happens is you get to the day and that meeting doesn't exist because it's not booked out in your diary. So you've got the information, but not the other bit. And that understanding, and it's a two-way process, isn't it? Understanding what other people need is really important, but understanding that you need to be really clear with your wants and your needs in the first place, so that everybody else understands what they have to give you, is really important too. Do you find that as you talk between sort of management and teams, Jane, that's part of the problem?
So what works really well in the workshops is when we talk about those situations, like, isn't it annoying when, you know, when that's all, you know, and you'll give that as an example, you know, and then we'll go through a scenario about how people might react to that, and then how it escalates, and then suddenly, you know, I'm not sending him any more meetings. He doesn't turn up for my meetings, you know, and suddenly, you know, you're not meeting again, you know, because just over a quick fix, but you've not talked about it. So this is why things like team meetings are important, and the one-to-ones as well, because, you know, you might think, well, I don't really need to have a one-to-one with this person because they're performing well. They sit in front of me. We work together, you know, but actually you do, because you won't actually talk about everything until you ask those open questions. What's working for you? What can be improved? What would you like to do in the future? You know, is there any projects that are going on that you wanted to get involved in that you've not mentioned? And then obviously for you giving them the feedback, you know, I think you're a great worker and I think you could do more. And so I'd like you to take on this project. How do you feel about that? They're the sort of things you talk about in a one-to-one that you don't talk about when you're working across the desk from each other. And again, going out for coffee, changing the location, changing the setting, all of those things are important to create that adult to adult conversation.
Yeah.
And making sure that people know that this is their time with you. Because we know people often say, you know, I'd like more time with the boss. And the boss goes, why? What, you know, what do you want me to say? You know, but it's actually that. It's just that cup of coffee. And it can be 30 minutes a month.
It's really interesting you should say that as well, because when I used to carry out workplace assessments, mainly in banks, and it was normally within sort of call center situations as well. One of the things that I used to write about in assessment reports time and time again were what I called micro breaks, or sorry, micro meetings. And micro meetings were, by my definition, where, and I expect we've all experienced this if we've worked in a larger open plan office, the manager comes up to somebody's desk and starts having a meeting with them at their bank of desks whilst they're still at the desk working.
Yeah.
And that is massively problematic for lots of reasons, because that person is still partly engaged in what's in front of them. They've either, the phone rings periodically or the emails coming through. So they're partly still engaged in the work, whilst this information about what's coming up, what's important, whatever, is being disseminated to them. And they're not fully engaged in it, and such a simple solution to that is literally to say, can we go over there for 5 minutes and have this conversation?
Absolutely.
I think also it's about people feeling valued. That's why they want time with the boss, isn't it? One, the boss is generally the expert, so they want to learn from them. And two, they want to, even when you're performing, you still need that. Do you know what you're doing well? Because even when you perform, you still have your own doubt at times, don't you? Or you might misread something and think, oh, if they got a cob on with me for that or this or that. And it can take something so small to just escalate. And I think if you don't have them touch points, both parties can become disillusioned to what's really happening, isn't it? And then that's when it's something so small that could be fixed. So we don't have time, but you've got to make time. So, I'm sure you cover time management as well.
But that's a great point. It's a great point, Diane, about the top performers, because we spend a disproportionate amount of time on the people that are poorer performers. We give them lots of time, we help them, we're very tolerant often of behaviour, performance, lots of meetings to check how they're doing. And the top performers, who are actually, let's face it, earning us money and flying high, and setting up that role model for all the others, we're saying, oh, we don't need to speak to them. They're all right. I mean, can you imagine if that was a football team?
Yeah.
And you just ignored your top strikers and never.
It'd be totally the opposite way around, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The bottom ones sort of, they get a bit of time, but at the end of the day, it's the ones who are the top performers that are walking around the place, being fabulous and getting all the attention.
I say that, but actually, with any team, it is a team. It's all about the team, and any good manager will pull together. Will say, "There's no ego there. There's no, if it's a bad performance, it's a team bad performance. It's not. The responsibility of anyone. It's the responsibility of us as a team. As a team, we have to get better at this, and that is good. That's good leadership."
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Sorry. I was going to say it leads on to mental health, which is obviously a big, can be a big problem. In that sort of leadership style where, when people feel good about themselves, i.e. good, that they're doing a good job and they're being told they're doing a good job, they're adding value, they're part of the team, they're liked, they're respected, then the mental health is really good and it builds on, doesn't it? Positive leads to positive. So, you do need to look after those that need support. Of course, you've got to get that right balance of support and challenge. But, the idea is to get everybody in that place where they feel good about what they're doing in work, at whatever level. This is you. This is your contribution to the team. Like you say, Graham, this is what you do. You're really important. And, it's like that story about the man who's sweeping up the factory in the NASA factory where they're, doing the space and everything in America. And somebody was doing a tour of the factory and they said to him, "What's your job?" And he says, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." Right. This guy's job was to brush the floor. But everyone had been told that without them, that man would not be getting on the moon. So he needed to keep the floor clean so that other people could work, so they could do their job, so eventually put the man on the moon. And that was what he said when somebody went and asked him, what do you do? He didn't say, well, I just brush the floor. I put the man on. I helped put the man on the moon.
I love when culture gets spread like that within the business. I went out to a seating manufacturer in Hamelin in Germany once, and we went round the factory, and we stopped in the embroidery section. We stopped where this woman got up, and she was so passionate. She was in tears by the end of it, talking about her work and just how vital it is to, you know, the quality of life of the people that would then sit on the chairs. And you just thought, wow, that's fantastic. The fact that they've empowered everybody in that way, and they've developed that culture of real belonging to the end result is just fantastic, you know. And when you see the opposite of that, where people are like, is it time to go home yet? Well, can't be bothered, you know. That's really not what you want. I was going to ask a question about bringing kind of Diane in with the recruitment side of things. Are we seeing a lot of companies needing the recruitment services or outsource recruitment services more as they're growing? In particular, I was thinking of knowing the fact that actually we now know that we need to train our management more. And actually in the past, we probably just promoted into management positions and watched people, you know, burn and die, as it were. Now that we know that we need to give people more time to learn management and settle into management, doesn't that mean actually the role of outsourcing something like recruitment becomes more relevant? Because actually, if the company's growing and we need to be, you know, we need to be finding new people to come into the company, we don't just want our managers to sit there and go, right, you know, our new managers who are still learning to just sit there and do this all by themselves.
Yeah, so I always encourage the line managers to get involved in recruitment, because they've got to select the people, because they've got to manage them. They have to have that accountability. But, and Diane will know, I say this all the time, the recruitment of people is a specialism in itself. And if you do it wrong, it has massive consequences, the least of which is that you recruit the wrong person, you know, but you could end up in all sorts of discrimination cases and all sorts of things. So training your managers on how to do interview skills and things like that is really important. But also going out to source the candidates, which is what Diane does, can be so time consuming. You know, it can use up your life, you know, because if you don't do it properly, you don't do it efficiently, it ends up costing you a lot of money in your time. And actually, you've got brand reputation to think about. So, you know, people come for interviews and they're not the right people for the job, or it's not handled properly. You're losing your brand in the market, and that's costing you customers. So, yeah, and Diane's heard me say this before about recruitment is definitely, I've had a recent client, Diane knows, who's tried to do a bit of recruitment on their own. And actually, I've tried to help them do the advertising just because I said I'd try and help. And it was a disaster. It's not my bag. It's Diane's.
And we've now got someone going at 5 o'clock on an interview today.
Diane's doing it now. So now I'm like, oh, thank God. Me and the clients are both like, oh, thank God Diane's doing it now.
That's what, you know, I understand sometimes the cost can seem a bit scary at times, but, you know, we do advertise across a number of job boards. A lot of people, when they're going to do it themselves, just go to Indeed. And okay, you will get a few candidates off Indeed, but depending on the type of role that you're trying to find, you know, we'll do it on Total Jobs, Reads, CV Library. So you've got more job boards that you're getting the reach of people to, and a higher caliber of people in certain instances, because everybody will use Indeed because it's free, which is great. But you then get, dependent on the job, maybe 250 CVs that you've got to look through or quite quickly read through. And when people ask, like, they want that golden nugget comes from opening each of them CVs, reading them and ringing the people, because unfortunately some people don't keep the CVs up to date either. And if I look at my own journey, I worked at McDonald's for 22 years, and although my skills were very transferable for recruitment, that might not have looked that way, when I was looking for a job, because people always want experience. However, I had no experience. I was hired, luckily, for a company, and I've got my own company in it. So you never know what somebody's about until you pick up the phone and have a conversation. And going back a few conversations ago, the culture of a business is just as important as the skill set of the person. We found someone who had 8 out of 10 skills, but their personality, the way they came across, their manner, what they speak about represented the culture of that business and the values, then that's more important to not having 2 of them skills, because you can teach skill, but you can't teach them values with certain people, so, and you're never going to know that till you pick up the phone. So that is what the in-depth process is like, and what we try and pride ourselves in is finding the right person to fit the business.
And part of it must be surely as well that if you are a talent and you're out there and you're looking for the next opportunity, that you're not going to lower yourself to put yourself in a space. I'm not having to go at any particular job space here, but you're not going to put yourself necessarily in a pool with a load of other people where you're going to get lost. You want to put yourself in a space or with somebody who is going to find you the role that is representative of your skill set. So it works that way as well. If a company is looking for top talent, and yet they're looking in a big pool over here where everybody else is, either you're going to have to take a long time, do a lot of work to sieve that pool down to find exactly what you're looking for, or they're just not going to be in that pool in the first place, because they will be actively looking for a specific thing and in a specific way. I wouldn't ever, if I was, not that I am, but if I was ever going to put myself back into the job pool again now for a specific role, I would go to a recruiter that's a specialist in a particular area and say, I want to work for that person or that person over there. And I'm looking for either those positions within those companies who I know that you already talk to, or something similar that I'm not aware of.
I think as we were saying, because as we were saying earlier, the social media and the internet and everything, candidates do know what company values are and what brands are, and they will choose, and they'll see things like Glassdoor, reviews, and they'll say, oh no, I don't want to work there, the culture doesn't look right for me, I'm not, and it could be that all these reviews are just, from all the people that were dismissed because they weren't great performers. And your recruitment agency can come in and say, well, yeah, I know you've probably read all them reviews, but let me tell you about the other side of the company. It's going places, it's doing this, it's had to let a lot of people go because it's changing its model, and you'd fit in ideally. Just go and meet the manager. It's an hour of your life. Go and meet the manager, see what you think. And then you get this great candidate who may have rejected you otherwise. Or the other side of it is, you're a big company and everyone's applying, and you end up saying, oh, well, I'll just look at the first 30 CVs then, and actually you could miss the best person.
Well, I guess that becomes incredibly relevant in today's market, especially where a lot of companies change what they need very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's not just a case of people are looking to change more quickly than they were before. I mean, whoever thinks, oh, I'm going to go, unless it's a specific vocation, whoever thinks these days, I'm going to go into a job and I'm going to be there 30 years and I'm going to walk out with the carriage clock. Nobody.
You know, I had a conversation with someone the other day quite about that, and they'd been like in each job just about 2 years. But to be fair, they had a plan, you know, of where they wanted to go. So they wanted to do a little bit of the forces, then they were doing a bit of charity work, and then they've gone back to the government to get to a certain job. So to be fair, they had a plan. However, I did say, like, okay, people don't maybe look for longevity like 22 years, 30 years. But if somebody job hops every couple of years, employers don't like that either. But the new generation do that a little bit more, you know, because if they're not happy or they're not whatever, they will go, and because the jobs are out there. But my advice to them was, you know, try and stay in this job now though for 4 or 5 years if you can, if it's what you want, stuff, because you do need to see some commitment and loyalty, you know, especially if you're trying to build a business from scratch, you know, you don't want to be having someone who you know is going to get itchy feet every 2 years just because that's the type of person they are, you know, because it becomes hard. On the flip side of that, you could argue from a HR point, our company's being more savvy that once people are reaching 2 years, they've done all the stuff they could to help give them time, underperformance, X, Y, and Z, and it's getting close to 2 years, so they say goodbye because they know legally there's not much that can be done. So that also could be reaped out of that CV, you know, that potentially they are an underperformer, you know. So people need to think wisely sometimes of, you know, how the CV is presented, you know, because it can tell a story that they don't probably necessarily see that it tells, you know.
Yeah. It struck me while you were talking about that, though, that a lot of that is down to communication of values and the overall objectives and story, because maybe it's absolutely right for someone to be employed if they're job hopping, not if they're job hopping, but if they're changing every 2 years because they have a very clear objective.
Yeah, exactly.
And a very clear set of skills. Yeah. Maybe that's just the person that organization needs at that point. But I think it needs to be, that's where, you know, beyond the CV, it needs to be more of a case of that whole story being explained.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Regardless of what anyone's CV, you have to have a conversation and say, how come you left there? What was the, you know, I always ask, like, back to 3 people, you know, 3 jobs back, you know, what was the reason you left there? You know, how come this? Now, if you're getting the same answer in a patterns form and you can see, but if they've got a strategic answer, then most definitely, you know, they've got a pathway of where they want to be. So you'd want someone in your business who's thinking, who's a forward thinker. You'd want that, you know, they'd be a golden nugget, wouldn't they? But someone who keeps saying, didn't quite get on with the management, didn't quite get on with the management. Didn't quite get on with the management.
Yeah, that's a bit of a red flag, isn't it?
Should go and work for themselves. Maybe.
Are you saying, Graham, that me and Diane didn't get on with the management?
Well, as someone that works for themselves, I don't know. I think sometimes I've taken. I've actually spent most of my life working for myself. I have been in roles, but I felt when I was in those roles, I felt I had a specific job to do, or I had a specific aim in mind, and I was brought in at a specific part of the journey, and I knew when to leave that part of the journey as well.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be very clear and open about that. And I think you have to have real understanding yourself about, where it's going to be your time to move on to the next thing. And I think I think we'll have more of those conversations in the future though, Jane. Do you not think? Do you think management and talent will have more of those conversations about strategically, this is where this is what this is about right now?
Yeah, exactly. And again, everything comes from the top. So the top management are deciding which strategy, where the business is going. And then as we look at our succession planning and our talent reviews, so where are our top performers, where are our growing performers, where's our potential, then we've got to try and map the people into the organization. And having those career development conversations, and it's not about where do you want to be in 5 years' time. It's basically, well, you've learnt these things this year, so we'll keep you on that for another 6 months. But what are we going to do next? Because it'd be good if you learned this new skill because the company is thinking about moving into something different. So, let's get a career path for you that moves you forward. The other argument as well is that you can have a good performer sitting in the same seat doing pretty much the same job for a few years, but their performance will naturally drop. They don't mean it to. It's just they lose a little bit of that engagement over that time. Oh, it's the end of the year, the finance accounts again. It's the mid-year, seasonal sales thing, whatever it is. And we've done it before. They stop being fresh.
They become complete.
Yeah.
Even if that's the job they want to remain in, they still become complacent where they might have 4 high performer, but they drop down to the 3. They're still good and they're really good, but they become complacent because as humans, we get bored, don't we? Of repetition. We need change. Like, I'm a champion of change. We used to teach change management, going back to that. And, embracing change for me is the way forward in life, because you can't change the change. For instance, none of us could change COVID, so we had to handle it and deal with it. And there's no point sitting there being negative, is there? So I totally agree. I think sometimes that can be the hardest employee to manage, is they don't want else. They're happy in a position.
Yeah. And it kind of happened to me in that when I was managing, the UK and Ireland sort of commercial departments, and I'd been doing that for a few years. I was in the team, I was kind of top of my shop, very happy, got my identity, know who I am, so does everyone else. And then, the boss said, we're opening a big IT division in London, and we'd like you to be the HR manager there. And I was like, oh. So it was like, oh, okay then. I said, but I like doing this. I like the sales and the commercial. So he said, well, you can do both if you want. We can get some people, underneath you to help and because I had a couple of big teams. And he said, but I want you to go, and they need your skill and you need a change. And I was like, do I? And I went off to do this big restructure. We recruited, from 200 to 1,000 IT people, and it was fabulous. I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I needed a change. And I was a bit like, oh, why are they moving me? Am I not good enough? But it was actually, they didn't want me to go stale.
Yeah.
And they could see that what I couldn't see, which is it was getting a little bit too comfy. So they threw me down into a division that I've not worked in before. And I learned all about IT jobs and how the different culture in an IT company compared to a sales company. And absolutely loved it. So,
now in the middle of that conversation, you mentioned briefly sort of appraisals, and I just wanted to kind of use that and come back round and end there today, because it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Jane, for joining us.
I've enjoyed it.
But appraisals, I'm still incredibly shocked. Maybe you're going to change my mind here and tell me that I'm wrong, but I'm incredibly shocked by the amount of companies who still do appraisals in a very old-fashioned way, and probably touch base with each member of staff once a year, and then suddenly everything that's been building up throughout the year gets heaped on this person as a big shock. You know, you haven't been performing at this, you haven't done this, we haven't been communicating well with this. Is it changing out there? Are companies starting to properly embrace sort of 360 appraisal systems with people asking for feedback, or are we still living in the dark ages generally?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an extreme, really. So the big corporates are doing more regular one-to-ones with the 360 appraisals, with management developments, all what I did when I was at Maersk Shipping. And then we go to the small, medium companies. And obviously, my clients do these one-to-ones. I persuade them, I coerce them, I teach them how to do it. You know, when they come to me with a problem, I say, "Did you have a one-to-one? Did you tell them? No, okay, this is your time." So there is, there are, you know, middle-sized businesses are starting to do more talking. But when you mention the annual appraisal, I always think of the David Brent, you know, The Office. There's a sketch where he actually, you know, calls the guy in and he's got his tick list, you know. Are you happy? Yes. Okay, tick. You know, do you need anything? No, tick. You know, and he goes through these very close questions and the guy just goes, yeah, no. And then he says, okay, that's great. That's your appraisal done then. Now get out of my office.
I think for you, Jane, you offer software, don't you? You offer HR software. On what we would have done is our appraisals were a working document. So if any of our staff like went on a new project or got a new system to look or something, we were to update it. You know, generally we'd probably update them, you know, once a month, you know, if not weekly, depends what's going on. Within your systems, does that offer that service? Because that's like really good to bring into this day and age, isn't it?
Yeah, so the HR software has all the data on it, has all the absence, the holidays, and you can log all the one-to-ones there as well. And all the objectives, anything really, contracts of employment, everything's on the software. And it's really good because the employee can see everything as well. Unless you mark, you know, do not see, which you can do with a couple of things where you might just have a list of things that you want to talk about next time. But generally, they can see everything. And again, it creates this culture of transparency, because there used to be a thing that, you know, us in HR, that people used to sit and think we went through people's personnel files, you know, all day. Like we had all the secrets. But actually, personnel files are quite boring, really. They tend to just have your name, address, your CV, a thick note from 3 years ago, and, you know, the name of your next of kin. Mostly they're pretty tedious. So now all that paperwork can be gone. It goes on the software and the employee can see what you can see.
And I think that's most important. You know, we were given our performance reviews before we attended our performance review. So we had to put in what we thought in all the subjects, and then the manager would put what they thought, and we'd have time to read that, because you're talking, this document could have been up to 20 pages long sometimes. So, you know, you would read it. So then you go with your questions and you go prepared to the meeting. And we would go to the different place and stuff like that. So I actually used to look forward to my performance review, you know, because you felt like it was your chance to have your say about certain things or whatever. And if you know that they're becoming regular, then a little niggly thing you can leave maybe till then or whatever, you know. And I think definitely with the new generation, you know, transparency just shows trust, doesn't it? You know, and trust equals respect. So I definitely think that's a valid point, Graham, that having a more fluid performance appraisal.
I mean, I implemented HR software in the last business that I was in, and
Right.
I think one of the most interesting aspects of it was not necessarily the sort of hierarchical tier down assessments, or even the peer-to-peer, but was when you then want to turn it on and go, actually, I want everybody to assess the management in terms of what the management are doing. And I think for a lot of management, that's like, what, you're going to assess me on the basis of how I manage? But that's so fundamentally important. If you're going to grow as a manager, you need people to be giving you feedback in terms of what you're doing. Ultimately, I think all of this is about us learning to be in a culture where we feel comfortable to ask for feedback and we feel comfortable to grow. And if we haven't got that as a culture within a business, then I think in 2024 you're going to struggle.
I always joke when I interview someone, and I'll always ask the strengths, which everyone will ask, and people will be like, yeah, I'm this, and I go, so tell me your opportunities now. And they look at me like scared. I'm like, look, there's no right or wrong answer, just let me know what your opportunities are. And they're like terrified, like as if that means they're not going to get the job. But actually not being able to answer that question would, to my opinion, mean they wouldn't get the job, because my point to them is, if you don't know what you're not so good at, when I come to tell you, it's going to feel quite awkward and difficult. And that's where conflict can start from the beginning, because the most important thing we have to be is self-aware. I think, you've got to be aware of what you're good at and what you need to improve on, because, even if you're a grade 4, a high performer, we've all got opportunities, you still can do better, can't you? You can still do things just a little bit better, or you've just got that one thing that you'd always fail on, when you need to improve. So, I think it's important people understand going into the interviews that it's not a negative, that it's actually a positive being able to answer that question.
Yeah, and also knowing when their strengths aren't appropriate.
Exactly, yeah.
So, if you're a quick decision maker, or somebody that's a bit impatient, or a driver, that's probably great. But in some situations, that's not what you want. Your style's got to change.
Yeah.
So, you could say, well, I'm a real quick decision maker, but, sometimes I have to watch myself, because I don't give other people chance to have an input.
Yeah.
So I'm
or
conscious.
you make a decision too quick and fail the business
because you
haven't thought it through.
Yeah. So, knowing this is my strength, but this is where I need to be careful not to overuse it.
Yeah.
Is fantastic. Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'd used to say. I'd say, look, my strength's being honest, but it's also a weakness, because at times I've been honest at the wrong times, and it's been a
And on that note,
always the best
policy. Get into trouble.
Anyone who knows me will know that's the truth.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being honest. We've covered a lot of ground today. I hope you've enjoyed listening. If you have and you want to join the conversation, please do comment as you watch or listen to this content out there. And just want to thank Jane once again for spending some time with us this afternoon to record this. Until next time, this has been the podcast from DCT Recruitment. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks.